Hello everybody and welcome to this, my second of 3 videos on the Sigma SD9. In the first video we talked about what everything on the camera is. In the third video we'll go through the menus, but in this video we're going to talk about how to use all of the stuff on this camera, and there is a lot on this camera. This camera heralds from a time when interface design wasn't quite so streamlined and people frankly did not know what digital photographers were and were not going to need. So this has a much different interface than anything you will see on the market today or for the last 10 to 12 years. Okay, first thing is we can't do anything with this camera without changing the batteries. So I'm going to show you how to change the batteries first. It takes 2 different kinds of batteries, and there are some asterisks and notes that we'll cover about the batteries in just a moment. First, down here on the bottom is a CR123 battery chamber, and you just take 2 CR123s, put them with the positive terminal facing the bottom of the camera, drop them in, close and lock the cover, and you have now changed the CR123 batteries. It also has this carrier over here, which I've loaded up with AA batteries. This can take AA, or it can take CR 3-volt batteries. Okay, so with this you just swap out the batteries. There's indicators on the caddy which ways the batteries face, and then you just take them and put them back into the camera that way, and you've changed the AA batteries. Couple of quick notes. That caddy can take AA batteries or CR 3-volt batteries. Don't mix them. Don't put 2 AA's on one side and 2 CRs on the other. That's a really good way to cause a fire. And this, by the way, these warnings come straight from the manual, just so you know. Also, don't mix AA batteries of different brands. Do not mix old and new batteries. That applies for both the AA's and the CR123s. And do not mix alkaline AA batteries with nickel metal hydride or rechargeable AA batteries. Use all of one or all of the other. Don't mix and match on the AA's. And also do not mix CR123 and DL123 batteries. I suspect that a lot of that is, of course, there is a way to blow up the batteries doing that, but also there's probably some voltage issues if you do that could damage the camera. So the manual doesn't say why you should follow those rules, it just says follow these rules. Next thing we're going to talk about is how to mount and unmount a lens. So to mount the lens, to remove a lens, you push the lens release button and you turn this counter or anti-clockwise until you can remove the lens. I have no Sigma SA lenses. I looked for like 3 or 4 months to try to find a Sigma SA lens and had no luck. They are not common. But I do have a Sigma SA to M42 adapter, which is the viewfinder on this is going to make manual focus a ton of fun. So your lens or adapted lens is going to have a little red index there, and there's a red index there. You just line those 2 up and screw it in, and you've now mounted a lens on your Sigma SD9. And for those of you curious, because I know you often are, Komura 100mm f1.8. Okay. Now that we have, I'm going to go back to just taking this off for right now because it'll be a little bit in the way. Now that we've mounted a lens and installed the batteries and we're ready to go, well, we can't quite take photos yet because we need a CF card. So we saw in the first video how to access the CF card. Once we open up the back, then we just push this little gray button in and we can pull out a CF card if there is one in there. There we go. So this is a standard old school CF card. This camera cannot take a CF card larger than 2 gigabytes. So 2 gigs is the hard limit. 4 gigabyte SD cards the camera cannot recognize. So you need a 2 gig or smaller. To insert the SD card, you just put it with the text facing the back of the camera and then just push it smoothly and straight into the camera like that, and you've installed your CF card. Okay. The power for the camera. So we're going to start here talking about what all of these different things are. We're going to start with the D dial, because in order to use the camera, we've got to turn it on, and right now it's off. But before we turn it on, over here you can see the battery indicators. A quick note is that these are marked C and D. C is the vertical and D is the horizontal. Okay, and C is for your CR123 batteries. D is for your AA's. So C for CR, D for AA's. You can also remember this by the CR batteries are loaded vertically into the camera and the AA's are loaded horizontally. And this tells you how much charge is left in them. Crazy that it has drained half or a third of those 4 Eneloop Pro AA's, which are newer batteries that I've got. They were fully charged when I put them in here last night and spent an hour writing the manual. This camera is not power efficient. Okay, turning it on. When we switch it off of off, the camera is now on, and we have accessed different shooting drive modes here in the camera. Single frame, if you can push down the shutter release and it will just, you can hold it until the end of time and it will never take another photo. But every time you take a photo, or push the shutter release rather, it will take a photo. Continuous, it will take a burst of 3 shots until it fills up the buffer, which it did very quickly. And then it will start writing, and you can see the red light is going crazy there. This camera takes a very, very long time to write to the CF cards. These are your self timers, 10 seconds and 2 seconds. Oh, that is an annoying beeping sound. So those count down to take a photo. Up is your mirror lockup. Now the way that mirror lockup works is that what you do is you push the shutter button once and the mirror gets locked up. Let's see if I can show you how this works a little bit better. There you go. Push the shutter button once, mirror locks up. Push the shutter button again, it takes the photo and the mirror goes back down. So very nice function and a really nice way to implement it with this camera, because it is very easy to access and turn it on and off. And then AB is auto bracketing. Okay, so the way that what you do here is you go to auto bracketing, and it's on the, is it on the back? Okay, this is a wonky interface. This took me a while to figure out last night. So for auto bracketing, set it to auto bracketing, have to press the shutter button, and now we can adjust the amount of bracketing that the camera is going to do. This is the number of stops. It's always going to do 3 photos, and it's going to separate them by up to 3 stops in half-stop increments. Okay. So let's do 2-stop increments. Why not? And we'll be in aperture priority mode just to make it a little bit easy. Now, once you've got auto bracketing enabled, you can see the AB there indicates that auto bracketing is enabled. So we're going to go to continuous mode, and it will take our 3 bracket sequence in continuous mode with auto bracketing. Will not turn it off. If we go to single shot, we can get auto bracketing, but we have to push the shutter button 3 times. To finish auto bracketing, we go back to AB, and then we turn the C dial, the command dial, back to 0, and then turn off of AB, and we have now turned off auto bracketing. So auto bracketing is another, honestly, I got to say, I got to give credit to Sigma for the implementation of those different functions, because that's it's a clever way to do it, a good way to skin the cat, as they say. Okay, next up is going to be our metering modes. So we know how to use the drive modes. Now we want to change the meter. Over here you can see this index, this little symbol right here, which is 5 blocks inside of a square. So if we hit the metering button, now we use the C dial to switch between these 3 selections. Okay, right here, this is 8-segment meter. So all blocks illuminated indicates that the camera is going to use its 8-segment meter to do evaluative or multimetering, whatever you want to call it. If we go to the empty brackets, this is full scene average metering, and that will take the entirety of the scene and come up with an average metering. This is center weighted. The single block is a center weighted metering mode where the central area of the frame will be used to provide the majority of the metering information, and the balance of the frame will provide the minority of the metering information. So what's the difference between 8 segment and averaging? With 8 segment, the camera weights the exposure calculation by the amount of lighting in the different segments. It might know, for instance, what is sky and what's not sky, and that would affect the way that it outputs the meter reading. Averaging takes every one of the segments, takes a reading, averages them together evenly, and comes up with a meter reading based on that. So averaging is really good for things like flash use. It's really good if you have even lighting. The 8 segment's going to be better if you have complex lighting or harsh lighting conditions or you're outside. Center weighted is really good if you're center framing portraits and things like that. All right, next thing we're going to talk about is the function button. It has limited uses. Function button, command dial here. So when we push the function button, we've got an indicator right over here for a remote. Those 2 hyphens mean that the remote is not operational. The camera will not be waiting for a remote to trigger it. C1, C2, and C3 are the remote channels. So you can grab the Sigma remote and set it to channel 1, 2, or 3, and then set the corresponding channel here, and the camera will know to look for it at that channel. If you push the function button again, now we have, that little beep indicator. 2 hyphens, no beep. On means yes beep. Matter of personal preference and whether you want your camera to beep at you or not. That is all that the function button does. AF button allows you to pick between S and C. These are your 2 autofocus modes. S is for single or servo, and C is for continuous. S is really good for portrait shooters, landscapes, still lives, things like that. What it does is it locks on to your a stationary subject, and when you have pressed the shutter button, and then when you have pressed the shutter button, and then keeps focus until you finish pressing the shutter button. Continuous, when you have pressed the shutter button, will track a moving object as it goes through the frame. So this is really good if you're at a sporting event or you're photographing kids or your pets or something like that and they keep moving around. Continuous is a better selection for moving subjects. Next up, we're going to talk about the flash hot shoe right here. This is your flash hot shoe. It's where you would connect a flash to the camera, and it is just a standard flash hot shoe right here. For digital cameras, you don't necessarily want to use an old, super powerful flash. Well, this is a weak flash, but the transistors in it are powerful by today's standards, and they don't have quite as much protection for backflow of the voltage into the camera. You don't necessarily just want to plug an old flash straight into a camera. This camera has now been on for about 15 minutes, and that's the point at which it starts to smell like a tire fire. I don't know what's inside of this. It hasn't started smoking yet, but this camera gets a really weird smell when it's been on for about 15 minutes. Anyway, so with a flash, the general thing that you want to do for your flash is just plug it into the hot shoe right here, and because there's no PC port, and then in manual mode, really this is the best place you're going to be to use your flash, is just make sure that you are set to 1/180th. Is that correct? That sounds correct. 1/180th of a second or slower, and you can use your flash. Now the reason that works is that your shutter curtain controls your shutter speed, but not by how fast it moves. When you take a picture, there's a curtain blocking the sensor. It drops out of the way, the sensor's exposed to light, and then the second curtain closes and they reset. Okay? At your flash sync speed of 1/180th of a second, the first curtain opens, the entire sensor is exposed to light for about 1/180th of a second, 1/180th of a second, and then the second curtain closes and they reset just like that. If you do a 50th of a second exposure, the first curtain opens, the entire sensor is exposed to light for about a 50th of a second, process repeats. If you're at 1/6000th of a second, the first curtain starts, and then the second curtain comes in right behind it. So you just have a very thin little slit of exposed sensor behind that second curtain. And what happens then is that if you were to use a flash at 1/6,000th of a second, you just have a very thin exposed area of sensor, and everything else would be black, having been blocked by the curtain. So 1/180th of a second and slower speeds, you can use your flash with this camera. Some basic flash technique is that you do not ever want, if possible, to have the flash in this orientation right here. And the reason is that this is the worst possible place for a flash. The light leaves the flash, reaches your subject, bounces off your subject and back to your sensor, and that light is very flat. It makes your subject look very flat, and it's not flattering. So since you have to put the flash on top of the camera, you really would like to get, at minimum, a tilting flash so that you can bounce it off of the ceiling. Or even better would be an articulating flash with tilt so that you can bounce it off of the wall if you don't have a ceiling handy, or reflectors or something like that. But why is that? Well, when you think about how we see people all the time, outside underneath the sun, or street lamps, indoors underneath overhead lighting, people are always lit from above. Our brains are wired to see lighting from above as natural and flattering and normal. So you want to replicate that to the best of your ability with your flash. Okay, next over here is your shooting mode dial. Full manual, shutter priority, aperture priority, and program. Standard shooting modes. Since we're at program, we'll start here. If you have a Sigma SA lens, which, I mean, I don't, but if you do, very nice, firstly, you can set this to program and the camera will pick the best shutter speed and aperture for you. Aperture value means you select the aperture and the camera will pick the best shutter speed. Shutter priority, you pick the shutter speed and the camera will pick the best aperture. Full manual, you pick the shutter speed and the aperture, and if it's right, hey, wonderful, and if it's not, camera don't care. It's going to do what you tell it to anyway. In shutter priority, aperture priority, and program mode, you can also do what's called EV shifting. If you hold down the exposure value button here, and then you rotate, which button? What do we push here? Here we go. Push down the aperture priority button and you can force the camera to overexpose or underexpose your image. There's a little minus sign there that indicates we're 1.5 stops underexposed. Turns into a plus symbol to indicate that we're 2 stops overexposed. Release and it will blink to remind you that you are doing an intentional over and underexposure. Come on, there we go. And it looks like you have to push that button and have to press the shutter to bring it up. Weird and wonky interface. Okay. In shutter priority mode and full manual, if you want to adjust the shutter speed, this is the shutter speed dial. This is how you turn it to make it the shutter speed slower. This is the direction you turn it to make it faster. Honestly, I think that's kind of a neat interface idea right there. Well done on that, Sigma. Okay. Okay, next we're going to push the resolution button, but I'm going to leave the camera face up for a minute. Watch the screen here. Push the resolution, adjust the command dial, and now we can switch between high, low, and medium, or high, medium, and low, however you want to go about it. So this is your image resolution. High is the full maximum potential of the sensor. I forget the exact sizes of low and medium. I don't have them written down, I don't think. Do I? Maybe I do. Nope, I don't. I did not write it down. Medium is a slightly smaller image, and low is an even smaller image. I mean, it's 2022, and data is cheap, so high is still only 3.4 megapixels. Low is something like 0.8 megapixels, I think, and then I think medium is around 2.1. You can just use high, and you're going to be fine. So the only reason to use medium or low anymore would be experimentation or to hasten the write speed in your CF card. We're going to stay here for now, and we're going to go to ISO. So push the ISO button down, and you can rotate the command wheel. The world does not wrap on this. It is back and forth on this. And you have 100, 200, and 400 as the ISOs you can choose from. That's it. So starting up here, This is the menu button. This is what we're going to cover in video 3. Everything in video 3 will be behind here, so we're not going to talk about it right now. This is the playback or view button. If we hit the view button, you can see that I've taken a bunch of photos with my lens cap on. Now the info button, we can push that and we can get some information about the image, things like when it was taken and specific settings. The modification button allows us to modify some of the image settings in the camera. We can lock it for protection and things like that. And then the delete button allows us to delete the image. So we can delete the current image, all images, whatever we want to do. I'm going to cancel out of that. So info, mod, and delete only work when you're in playback. If you're not in playback, these buttons have no effect whatsoever. Okay? OK and cancel have the standard OK and cancel functions. Control pad only for control. Auto exposure lock button. You can hold that down to lock your exposure when you're about to take a photo. So auto exposure lock is really good if you have changing lighting conditions, or if you want to take a photo of someone who is in a significantly different lighting condition than the background. Either, let's say you're out at dinner at night and you're sitting underneath an awning with a bunch of overhead lights. You can take a meter reading off of the tabletop if it's a light color, or the cement that you're sitting on because that's a neutral color. Hold down auto exposure lock, compose an image to get the person you're with in the frame and in focus, and then take a picture of them, and you'll get a proper exposure on the person, and the background will be very dark, but that's okay. That's what the auto exposure lock button is for. That took a whole lot less time than I expected it to, because with that is everything that we had to go over that is not a menu button item on this camera. So that's video 2, and in video 3, we're going to go through all of the different menu items on the camera in this button and talk about how to configure them. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in video 3.